What's up, guys? So today we are going to jump right into variables. Last video I covered the print statement, and we're going to use that a little bit in this video too. But to start it off, we've got four main variables. We've got a string, misspelled that. We've got a string, an int, a float, and a Boolean. So a string is going to be anything within quotation marks. So for instance, what we did in the first video, if I've got some text here, this is a string. Because it's in quotation marks, it is a string value. An example of an integer value is going to be something like 34 or 89 or 56. An int is going to be any whole number. If we had 76.5, for instance, that is not an int. An int can only be a whole number. But a float is a decimal place value. So for instance, 67.5 or 98.6. These right here are float values. And there are some cases where you would want to use an int value in your programming. I got into a habit of using float all the time when I was just starting out because I thought, you know what, I'll have no bugs if I always use a float. But when you print out your code and you have a whole number, that's what it's going to print out. And sometimes that just doesn't look good. Also, an int variable uses less memory. So if you get really big, long codes and memory starts to become an issue, you should use ints in place of floats when you can. Now, our last variable is a Boolean. So a Boolean is a true or false statement. And one big thing about Python is it is case sensitive. So for instance, if I have false, notice how this right here is not bold. This is bold because my IDE is telling me that this is a Boolean. So for instance, later on when we get into if statements, if this scenario is true, do this line of code. But if we want to branch off to another path, you would use another else statement. And it's just a way of branching off if you have conditionals. We can go ahead and delete this. And you can store these variables with names. So for instance, age equals, let's say I'm 60 years old, just as an example. Well, if I was to print this, age, save it and run it, we get 60. Because this right here is being set to 60. Whenever we reference this now, the 60 is stored within it. So this is how we set up our variables. Now, let's say I had a friend and my friend's age is equal to, let's say 47. Now, just like in our first video, we can print strings in here. So if I were to print this, I would get age. I wouldn't get the value because I have set it to call a string. But because this is an int, and we can do print 2 plus 2, stop that, save it, and run it, we can get 4. The same thing is true here. So I can do print age plus friend age. If I stop it and run it, I get 107. So just like this is an int, this is an int, and this is how we're going to store variables for future use. You're going to use variables in just about any program that you write. So this just saves a lot of time. Instead of writing 60 plus 47, you may know what that is referring to in your head. But when you start writing hundreds of lines of code or thousands of lines of code and you come across something that doesn't really look right, when you go back to figure out what's wrong with your code, you may forget exactly what this is referring to. Like, you may be 60 plus 47, what was I using there? Well, if we use age plus friend's age, that way anytime you go back to your code, you can see, oh yeah, age plus friend's age. I'm calculating the sum of my ages. We can also shortcut this by saying sum age equals, and I'm just going to copy and paste this here. We'll cut this, paste it, and write sum age here. This is just calling to print out this variable. This variable is equal to our int up here and our int right here. So it's going to give us the exact same output, 107. Now, if I wanted to print a Boolean variable, and let's say I'm a boy, so boy equals true. If we were writing a code that this had use for, and I just said print whether or not I'm a boy. If I save this and run it, we get true. So this is pretty much how you would save variables to shortcut code. And you're going to, like I said, you're going to use variables in just about every program you write. And another functionality of this is if anyone comes in to read your code, if you ever get help, if you're ever working in a team, they can look at this and say, oh yeah, we've got age 60, da 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 da, and they can read this easier. This is how you're going to code in the real world. So I hope that this summed up what variables is, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. If y'all have any questions, drop them in the comments and leave a like if this really helped you out. I'll see y'all in the next one.